Want to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about
Fadak.
Fadak, yeah. That's right. And
It's
this is going to be a fascinating look into the very early history of Islam.
It is.
Right after the death of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes.
Peace be upon him.
Yes.
And we're going to look at some really interesting things about how Islamic law developed and how different schools of thought emerged.
Yeah. What's interesting about Fadak is that it's on the surface, it seems like just a land dispute.
Right.
But really, it's a window into, like you said, the origins of Islamic jurisprudence.
Absolutely. And, kind of the beginnings of different understandings of, what Islam was supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And how these different interpretations
Right.
really had a lasting impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things we're going to see today is that we're dealing with a lot of different sources.
Yes.
Right. We're dealing with the Quran, obviously. We're dealing with Hadith.
Yes.
Which are the sayings and stories of the Prophet.
Right.
And these Hadiths come from different collections.
Yes.
They come from different schools of thought within Islam.
Exactly. And it's understanding those nuances. I think that's going to be really helpful.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's going to make this deep dive so interesting is that we're not going to shy away from those different perspectives.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to try to present them as fairly as we can.
Absolutely.
And let our listeners kind of draw their own conclusions.
Yes, because ultimately the Fadak controversy is still something that is discussed and debated
To this day.
this day.
Yeah. And so our goal is to equip you, our listeners, with the knowledge
Yes,
to be able to participate in those discussions intelligently.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. So first things first. Fadak.
Fadak.
What was it?
So Fadak was this very fertile and valuable piece of land.
Okay.
It was near Khaybar, which was an oasis in the Arabian Peninsula.
Okay.
And it actually came under the control of the Prophet Muhammad during his lifetime.
Okay.
It was as part of a peace treaty.
Okay.
And so it became his to manage.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is what he decided to do with it.
Yeah. And what was that?
He gifted it to his daughter, Fatima Zahra,
During his lifetime?
during his lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she was in possession of this land
That's right.
before he passed away.
Correct. And this is where the story gets
Interesting.
really interesting.
Right. So after the Prophet passes away,
Yes.
Fatima goes to Abu Bakr.
Right.
Right. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with that name,
Sure.
who was Abu Bakr?
So Abu Bakr was the first caliph
Okay.
after the Prophet Muhammad.
And what does that mean, caliph?
Right. Good question. So caliph means successor.
Okay.
It refers to the leader of the Muslim community after the Prophet's death.
So kind of like a spiritual and political leader.
Exactly. A position of great authority.
Right.
Yeah.
So Fatima goes to him
She does.
to claim what she believes is hers, right?
Yes.
And what happens?
So Abu Bakr, he actually denies her claim.
Oh, wow.
He says that prophets, they don't leave inheritance.
Interesting.
Whatever they leave behind is for charity, for the community.
So he's saying that even though the Prophet gave her this land during his lifetime,
Yes.
it still doesn't belong to her.
Correct, because he's arguing that it's not really his to give in the first place.
Wow. Okay. So what evidence did Abu Bakr use?
Well, he cited a hadith,
Okay.
which is a record of the Prophet's sayings and actions.
Right.
And this particular hadith states, "We, the prophets, do not leave inheritance. Whatever we leave behind is charity."
Okay. So, I mean, that's pretty clear, right?
It seems clear.
Right. He's saying prophets don't leave inheritance.
Yes, but this is where it gets really interesting. Because this hadith sparked a lot of debate and controversy.
Why is that?
Well, because on the one hand, you have this hadith, but on the other hand, you have the Quran,
Right.
which clearly outlines inheritance rights, including those for women.
And we actually have a verse that talks about this, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You tell us about that.
Yeah, so in Surah An-Nisa, verse 7, it states, "For men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave, and for women is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave."
So that's pretty clear.
Right.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Where men and women inherit
Yeah.
from their parents.
Exactly.
So how do we reconcile that with this hadith that says that prophets don't leave inheritance?
That is the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And this is what scholars have been debating for centuries.
Okay.
And, there are other verses in the Quran, too.
Like what?
Like in Surah An-Nam, verse 16. It clearly states, And Solomon inherited David.
So this is a prophet inheriting from another prophet.
Right. So that seems to directly contradict
It seems to, right.
this hadith.
Exactly. And so this is where the interpretation gets really complex.
Okay, so we've got this hadith that Abu Bakr is using to deny Fatima's claim.
Yes.
We've got the Quran that seems to say that prophets do leave inheritance. So how did Fatima respond to all this?
So Fatima, she wasn't just going to back down, right? She was known for her eloquence, her knowledge, her deep understanding of Islam.
All right.
And she delivered this very powerful sermon
Wow.
where she argued her case.
Okay.
She drew upon her knowledge of the Quran, her understanding of her father's legacy.
Okay.
And this sermon is still studied today for its eloquence and its insights into this period of Islamic history.
So where can our listeners find this sermon?
So you can find the sermon in a number of historical sources. Some of them are specific to the Shia tradition, but it's a really fascinating read, no matter what your background is.
Okay, so we've talked about Abu Bakr's side. We've talked about Fatima's side.
Yes.
Is there any other evidence that was brought to bear on this issue?
Yes. So there's another piece to this puzzle.
Okay.
And that is that some hadiths, particularly those found in Jafari texts.
Okay, and remind us what Jafari texts are.
Right. So these are collections of hadiths that are compiled by scholars who follow the Jafari school of thought.
Okay.
This is a school of thought within Shia Islam.
Okay.
And these hadiths actually support Fatima's claim
Okay, how do they do that?
by stating that the Prophet actually gifted Fadak to her during his lifetime.
Okay.
So it wasn't just part of his inheritance.
Right.
It was already her property.
Okay, so that kind of takes away the whole argument
It does in a way.
of whether prophets leave inheritance.
Right, because if he gave it to her as a gift, then it's hers, regardless.
Regardless, yeah.
Right.
So this is really fascinating.
It is. It's a very nuanced
Yeah.
issue.
And I think it really highlights the fact that interpreting these early Islamic texts
Yes.
is really difficult,
It is.
right?
It's not black and white.
Right. It's not just
Yeah.
opening the book and there's the answer.
Right.
Right. There are all these different perspectives.
Yes.
All these different schools of thought.
And different collections of hadith,
Exactly.
which is important to remember.
So I think, to kind of bring this all together, what we've seen today is that
Yes.
this controversy over Fadak
Yeah.
is really about much more than just a piece of land.
It really is, yeah.
Right. It's about
It's about inheritance.
Inheritance.
It's about understanding the Quran. It's
Right.
about understanding hadith.
Right.
And how they all come together.
and also, kind of what was going on
Yes.
in this very early period
Absolutely.
of Islamic history.
Yeah, like the formation of different schools of thought.
Exactly.
Right, in the decades after the Prophet's death.
And, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that there isn't always one right answer.
Right, exactly.
Right. There are these different perspectives.
Yeah.
And it's important to be aware of them.
And to understand where they're coming from.
Exactly.
What are the arguments?
Yeah.
What are the evidences?
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. Right? Because we've tried to present all of those things
Yes.
to our listeners
As objectively as possible.
as objectively as possible so
Yeah.
that they can make up their own minds.
Exactly.
Right. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave our listeners with a question, something to kind of ponder.
Yeah. What's up?
How does this controversy over Fadak continue to shape perspectives within the Muslim world today?
That's a great question to ponder.
Right. Because this isn't just ancient history.
It's not.
It still has relevance
It's still relevant.
to this day.
It shapes how people understand Islamic law and how they understand leadership. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So we encourage you, our listeners,
Yes.
to do your own research.
Absolutely.
Read these sources.
Yes.
Learn more about this controversy.
Yeah.
And come to your own conclusions.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
Bye. Bye.